Hey, everybody. I hope everybody's doing good. I know we're a minute or two early. I thought I would jump on and make sure everything was working. If someone can let me know that you can hear me in the chat, I would appreciate it just to make sure that everything is all good there. So, Manny, thanks for coming. So, Pompano Beach, how far away is that from Miami? We're going to be down in Miami in February for besides ICS and S4, of course. Everybody hear me okay? I assume so. So okay, very cool. Thank you. I know there's a slight delay too on the so it's always it's kind of tricky. I think there's like a 5-10 second delay. So talking into the past. So welcome. I appreciate everybody for joining. We'll give everybody another minute or two to jump in, and then we'll get this started. Alexander from Costa Rica, Puerto Vida. Yeah, from Paris. We're gonna be there in a couple months for a wedding, so it's a good excuse to finally get to go. So I'm excited. Couple of folks from Paris, so very cool. So Delphine from Mar- Mauritius. Sorry, I butchered that. I'm sure. Demetris from Greece. Swapnil, thanks for coming. Sometimes I can't see names, so but I do appreciate everybody for jumping in. Sometimes it shows on whether on LinkedIn or YouTube, and then uh, sometimes it doesn't. I don't know why. So, Cedric, thanks for coming. All right. Well, I guess it's noon, so we'll go ahead and get started. I appreciate everybody again for jumping in. I really started to want to do more sessions on Thursday afternoons. So my plan is to do another one next week as well, and talk about some of the insights, at least what I thought was interesting in the Dragos Urine report. It's the one report every year that I look to really see what's going on in the OT ICS cybersecurity landscape. And then so we're going to talk about that next week. I think there was a ton in there that didn't actually get as much attention as it should have. So we're gonna spend some time with that. For today, though, I wanted to talk about this little hands-on lab that I had put together. I've been meaning to do this for quite some time. For those of you that know me, though, I always talk about I am not a developer. I do not have the patience. I admire anybody who does. I'm very jealous of you. I just don't have that temperament. I know, uh, but ChatGPT can definitely help, and other Gen AI tools. I tried a few. ChatGPT is just the one that seems to work the best for me, and to be able to create a simulated uh, OT environment that we could start to test with. And then the idea was, like, especially with my pen test class coming up, to have, of course, additional environments and lessons to build off of. So you learn more, as you go along. So this one is actually kind of like the second lesson. So it's not starting at the very beginning. Uh, and you'll see what I mean in a second. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I did have a couple of slides that I pulled from that class as well because I thought it would help set the stage. And then I'm just going to share out my entire screen because that'll typically make it easier, except when you see everything. All right. So hopefully, I'm going to see if I can see it on the other screen. Maybe. I don't know. Sometimes it works a little strange. I'll probably stop sharing to give me one sec because I really would like to see. Oh, it does look like it's. I did want to see questions as they pop up. So if you do have questions as you go along, you can see here the delay. There we go. So if you have questions as we go along, just feel free to drop them in the chat. So again, of course, quick disclaimer: everything that we're going to talk about is educational purposes only, and not teaching you to hack into OT systems to go use this for the forces of evil. So also just to mention, when we talk about penetration testing in OT, never want to perform it in production. There can, yes, be lots of asterisks and caveats in certain environments, and that's, to be worked out in those environments. But I'll never tell anybody to do pen testing in a OT environment and in a production OT or ICS environment, like a manufacturing facility or a power plant. So primarily because of the safety concerns, so that would be number one, and then any availability issues. Right, we don't want to crash the plant and have it our fault. So I love pen testing. I love pen testing a lot. I just don't want to get someone hurt, kill somebody, or bring down a plant that probably generates lots of money and potentially lead to people being out of work. That's just not something I would want. So, so again, I took a couple of the slides from the upcoming pen test course uh, to just kind of set the stage and where I was going with this first lab. And so it was really when we talk about OT pen testing. That's why I wanted to write the course, because you could talk to like 10 different people, and there's not that many that are truly experienced in true OT or ICS pen testing. Right? I can count them on two hands. That when you look at OT pen testing and you talk to 10 different people, you probably get 10 or more different answers. I've actually had people start to answer it, then they come back and then they change it. So, and I get to talk with a lot of great people in the field and in the industry. And so again, I wanted to kind of take all of that and put it together into a course because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about pen testing in OT, especially for folks like myself that come from an IT cybersecurity background. It always seemed very mysterious, right? And I'm an old school pen tester, right? I've been doing pen testing for 20 plus years, probably 25 plus years at this point. I love again doing pen testing, um, and and so again, it's really taking that into the OT world. So where do we start? So again, I put a timeline together, and some of you have seen this if you've seen some of my other content on YouTube or LinkedIn. And actually, I have even a newer version of this. But the idea, the two things that this shows. One is the number of attacks that impact OT environments, whether they come, whether they're traditional IT attacks or whether it's, OT specific attacks. I'm not trying to distinguish between the two, but the number of attacks against environments is increasing, right? Um, and in the course, I like how it really came together. I'm really excited about it because each section starts with a case study, the real world. So we actually start with Frosty Goop, which I think a lot of people probably agree, not the greatest name. No offense to our friends at Dragos. Whoever discovered it at Dragos, they're the ones that actually named it. But Frosty Goop, you see, not long ago, was actually used. It was a very simple tool that the Russian state adversaries had used to modify the controllers in apartment buildings in the Ukraine. So it was the middle of winter, sub-zero temperatures outside, and they used this tool to turn off the heating in 600 apartment buildings, not apartments, but 600 apartment buildings, and use it shut off the heating for 2 days. I think until they actually figure out what the heck was happening. Yeah, that had to have been a horrible experience for the folks living in those apartments, to say the least, as you can imagine. Right. So there was a real world impact. So I like this example. No one died, right? But was not very fun to say the least. From if you were in those apartment buildings. Okay. Um, that's what we're just talking about. And that the attackers got onto the OT network and then deployed this tool called Frosty Goop to be able to connect to the controllers and make changes so that way it would disable the heating. And so I actually did in my DEF CON presentation at the ICS Village last year was building actually Frosty Goop, replicating it from the Dragos research where that they had released talking about the tool and using that to build out the tool because it's actually a very simple tool. Now, if you've never seen anything like this before or haven't even heard of Modbus, then this looks really, really weird, and I get it. Right? Trust me, I started exactly where you are. But part of, again, the idea of this session, the pen test course is really to help walk through, right, what we're actually talking about, what this actually means, and how it's not actually that difficult. And so that was again a big part of that DEF CON ICS Village presentation was looking at recreating the tool using ChatGPT, right? 15 minutes or less, you had a full working copy of Frosty Goop and this state adversary application or tool. Right? Um, but hopefully, you'll see after this session, we're not talking about rocket science. So, and that's what we're going to look at. So, and I'll come back and look at if there's any questions. So I'll kind of pause along the road. But if you're not familiar when we talk about OT or operational technology or ICS, industrial control systems, I use the terms interchangeably. Sometimes you'll hear me say control systems as well. Same thing. I use that. That's in the day job. I work for one of the world's largest engineering companies. They talk in control systems. We're really talking about the same thing. In this case, this is where this is my idea of showing part of a power plant. Right. In that power plant, you see on the right hand side, we have a combustion chamber. That's what it's supposed to be. So the idea is that in that combustion chamber, you bring in natural gas and mix it with oxygen and light it on fire to generate a lot of heat. And then that heat can do things like generate steam, which then can be used to turn a turbine. And then that turbine will spin to turn a generator, which then creates electricity. So that's how we make power. Um, so this is the idea that we have natural gas, right? We have a natural gas uh, supply that's coming into the power plant to go into the combustion chamber to heat to then generate ultimately electricity. That's the whole process that what we're talking about that we want to look at controlling out in the real world or from in an operations perspective, right? We want to make sure we're monitoring all of this that's happening in the plant, make sure everything looks good, right? And that if there's ever an issue, right, we get an alert, something looks weird on a monitoring screen, then we can take action. Right. That's the whole idea of OT and ICS and control systems, right? It allows us to monitor what's going on in the environment and then allows us to control. We can make changes. We can adjust as needed. Right. This also used to be, of course, all manual work back in the day. But now, because we have control systems, right? I talk about computers that we use to control things out in the real world, control that real world process, right? The physics of the plant. Some engineers hate when I say it's computer, but it is. They say it's system. Okay. So, but if I'm bringing in natural gas, right? If I have natural gas, I want to make sure, right? Is the flow appropriate? Is it not too fast, not too slow, right? We have to make sure it's just right. Maybe there's a point where we need to cut it off, right? So those are things that we need to be able to monitor for, right? And like the turbine, right? How fast is that turbine spinning? Is it too fast, too slow, or right, just right? Maybe is it starting to overheat, right? Those are all things we need to monitor for and be able to adjust for. So to be able to monitor what's going on physically in the environment, this is where we'll deploy controllers. So in this case, we talked about a PLC, programmable logic controller. And this is what we're going to simulate in the lab today. Because, it costs 400 or 500 bucks to buy one of these, a cheap one. Right? So that's a lot of money, right? And there's not a ton of virtual environments out there. Really, up until 6 months ago, there was like one really that was free to use, and we'll talk about those, right? But so in a plant, we'll have something like a PLC, right? A PLC again, it's essentially a computer, right? It's got a processor, memory. It has just a very little hard drive. It's not storing like massive spreadsheets or anything, right? It just needs a little logic to understand what it's supposed to do. And so in this case, those PLCs are physically wired into things in the real world, like things like sensors, right? And that's where we talk about inputs. So we can take a measurement and we can bring that information and put it into the PLC. And then the PLC, based off of its programming, can take action. And then it can also, part of that action is it can trigger actions out in the real world. And so that's what we're going to look in the lab today. So it should be something that you recognize and you can be able to work with. That's that first lab. Now, of course, future labs will be like, it's not going to be easy to recognize. You're not going to know what it is, at least by default. So it's all about kind of solving the mystery of, okay, what the heck is this thing? That's when I think of OT penetration testing, that's what I'm really thinking about. Because one thing, and I'm probably jumping ahead, so I'll kind of pause there for a second. So now, also with that PLC, I also mentioned, right, one of the main roles of OT or IC is all about monitoring, right? So we need to be able to see as humans also what's going on in the environment. So we have things like HMIs. This would be a screen, right, that communicates with the PLC to tell us, okay, what's going on, right? So we have this physical process, like in this case, right, natural gas flowing into the uh, combustion chamber, right? And we want to monitor that entire process. To do that, we actually have a PLC, right? The programmable logic controller. I'm simplifying it, but you get the idea, right? It's physically wired. There are literally wires from the controller to the different instrumentation and things like actuators that maybe, like if I want to open a valve or close it, or maybe I want to turn it a little or close it a lot, right? That those are wired into the PLC. And what I can see from the HMI is the data on the PLC that is pulling from the environment that we're trusting is as it should be. It doesn't mean that somebody hasn't come in and manipulated those values, though, which is what we're going to see. And that's what happened in Frosty Goop, where they turned the heating off for 2 days in the middle of winter with sub-zero temperatures outside. Right. So it's really about, right, what if a hacker or an attacker does get into the OT environment? How are they able to, find that HMI? What if they find the PLC and then start to manipulate those values, which then lead to real world consequences? There's a lot there, though, right? So again, I'm not going to try to jump ahead too much. But are there any questions so far? I'll take a quick pause there. But um, so Clayton asked, how does Frosty Goop differ from other Modbus TCP tools and utilities? And, and that's actually kind of I guess, a fun question, because what you'll see is it's probably not much different, honestly. And again, I recreated it in ChatGPT in like 15 minutes or less based off of the Dragos research. Um, what you'll see is, and actually, I have a whole rant in the pen test class for this, because it's interesting because there's like some old school Modbus tools out there. A lot of them are created for like OT technicians working in the field, and they want to charge you for like the, 100 bucks for these like 20-year-old tools. And like, I'm not paying for that. So I'm like, I'm going to create my own in ChatGPT. And there's other people that have created their own without using Gen AI. Again, I'm very jealous, but that's just not me. so, so there are a lot of kind of like these one-off um, tools for Modbus that are out there. Yeah, so there's a lot. One Marcel Rixen, who's out at Germany, he actually did a video on the labs we're going to talk about today, and he actually used there's a tool. I forget the gentleman's name. I feel bad now because he had put a message on LinkedIn, but he has a tool called Buspone. So it's kind of like what we're looking at today, but he's using a web interface to do it, which is nice from that perspective. I'm working on a kind of a similar version, which will make it easier to update values. Like if you had access to that controller, right, and I want to change a value where I can do it in a web interface. Today we're going to do it in a command line, and there's a reason for that. So, but hopefully that answers your question. So we're getting to the hacking part. so we just got to get the background to understand, right, what we're actually doing, right? So again, this is what we're going to essentially simulate, but I'm not simulating the power plant yet, right? So this lab is going to be, again, it's going to be something that you are more familiar. I did want to make the point though, and I think this is one of the things that a lot of people don't realize that if you go into an OT environment, right, you have things like if I go into a power plant, I use power plant because my first project that I walked onto was one of the world's largest, kind of traditional, like non-nuclear power plants. And I remember this is like back in 2012, so 13, 14 years ago. You walk in, and the one thing that I had not realized, which was crazy for me coming from an IT cybersecurity background, is that yes, we have all of these physical systems in the real world that run the process, right? Like the power plant, we generate electricity, right? And then we have these OT assets like PLCs and HMIs. There's a few others as well. But the idea is that everything else in the OT network is what we always see. Normally I would ask, but since there's a big delay. so the idea is there's Windows machines everywhere. I mean, you'll see Active Directory, right? Like, wow, right? For usernames and password, like for authentication for the Windows machines, right? And you use GPOs you might use for things like system hardening, right? We have engineering workstations, which are pretty much just laptops, or sometimes they're like an old school kind of workstation, but you use that to connect to that PLC to do things like upgrade firmware or make programming changes. Because what we'll see today is that that PLC, right, it has its own logic inside of it, right? And it monitors what's going in the environment. It has to have the logic. How does it respond? And again, you'll see what I mean using a common example that should be familiar to everybody. I think, yeah, we have the physical systems, right? Then we have the computers or the OT or the control systems that monitor and control those real world processes, the physics of the plant. And then pretty much it's Windows everywhere. It's again, it's still crazy to me a lot of times. And yes, you might see some Linux, here or there, but I mean, it's like it's not like in the IT world where you'll see more Linux, percentage wise. Um, Linux is pretty limited in the OT world. So that's the OT network, right? And then we have the IT network, and that we can allow communication between them, and we can have OT send to IT, and we could potentially have IT reach into OT, which is where we get into trouble, right? Because if OT can reach into OT, that's where an attacker could also, if they get into the IT network, reach into the OT network. Right? So we talked about all those control systems and then all these Windows machines, which makes it really easy for attackers to move from IT to OT because everything is Windows. This is where they talk about there's phase one attacks and there's phase two attacks, and whether we look at it from an attack perspective or we're penetration testers, right? If you look at, you might have heard of like of a group called Volt Typhoon. Volt Typhoon is a Chinese state actor group that was responsible for getting into a significant portion of critical infrastructure in the United States and across the world. So they would have one main group that they would be really, really good at IT pen testing. So they would get into the IT network and then move into the IT or the OT network on just the Windows machines. And then once they got that foothold in the Windows environment in OT and probably took control of everything Windows related, then they handed off access to a group, a smaller group that they had that focused only on OT. And so when we're talking about OT or ICS pen testing, we're saying, hey, we've already got access to the entire Windows environment. Now we're focused on just those OT or those control systems like PLCs and HMIs. Right? In larger environments, you'll have what they call a DCS, like at that power plant. You'll have safety instrumented systems to help not only make sure that the plant stays safe, right? And it can shut down if there's ever a fault condition, but make sure that certain things can't happen if certain security controls aren't in place. And then SCADA, you might have also heard of the term. That just means it's we're monitoring and controlling something over a wide area link, right? So if I have a long pipeline that's hundreds of miles long, right, and we're monitoring little stations for that pipeline, every let's say 50 miles, then I'm doing that over a wide area link. That's called SCADA. All right. So now we're going to start to get to, yes, the part that everybody wants. But when you look at different control systems, they run different protocols. These protocols have all been adapted, most of them, right, to run over TCP/IP these days, which is, of course, where the biggest risk comes from. And the kicker, remember, these were created 20 plus, 30 plus years ago in some cases, where no one ever thought about cybersecurity. It was all about just making sure everything worked. Right. And so Modbus is the most commonly used OT protocol, which is the one we're simulating today. And I do have a couple of infographics or cheat sheets out there on LinkedIn. You can find these on my GitHub repository too. I have some links at the very end. But so for things like Wireshark, Nmap, and and to help as right we go through kind of looking at these assets. And of course, we do put a firewall between IT and OT, ideally, if not multiple firewalls for a DMZ, right? So that'll help limit the traffic, right? So what if that attacker gets into IT? We want to try and limit what they have access to, right? Um, and that's it for slides. So as you saw, it kind of went to the end. So now I'm going to go ahead and pull up the simulated environment. So I'm actually going to, I think I have the link to the Google Drive. Yeah. No, that's the course. Let's see, because I was going to share that with everybody. Let me put this in the chat. The screen is going to look really weird for a second. So if you haven't seen the labs that I put together, like on the LinkedIn post, there is the link to Google Drive, and this is what you'll pull up the browser, so you'll see what's actually in there. So there's a couple of files. So there's a PDF that's actually the walkthrough of now what I'm calling OT Pen Test Sim Lab number one. Okay. So there's a walkthrough about like downloading it and getting it to run. And then there's three different Python scripts that are there. For me, I've just copied them over into this folder called C scripts on my machine. Okay. So to launch, I'm going to bring up my command line. I'm going to kind of make this a little bigger for everybody so it's easier to see on the screen. And then I'm going to go ahead and launch the kind of the simulated environment. So I'm going to do Python and then I'm going to do OT pen test. Oh, Let me change directories. Sometimes I know what I'm doing. Python, OT, pen test. Okay. So when we run this is one where, okay, it's simulating two things. It's going to simulate a kind of a virtual, it's like a simulated PLC in the background. And then it's also giving us this really simple HMI, right? So if we go back to the screen, right, what we're talking about in this scenario, right, is we're simulating the PLC that's getting the values, right, from the environment, from things like sensors, and then it's simulating a really simple graphical interface that we as humans could use to not only monitor to see what's going on, but we can interact with the system, right? That's what we're simulating, a PLC and the HMI. Right? So again, very simple. There's nothing special. It's if we go back and look at it, you can see that, oh, okay, well, it looks like something like a thermostat, right? Because again, I figured this is something that we've all probably seen in our lives in some way, shape, or form, right? You might have one in your house or at the office or at your school. And so you can see that it has connected status, which means the HMI is talking with our PLC. It's showing that the air conditioner is running, right? So the AC unit is on. Now it talks about the set point. Now, a set point that we have is actually a term that we have in control systems. So we'll actually place the set point, the value of, well, in this case, what do we want the temperature to be in the room, right? So in this case, we say we want the temperature to be 72 degrees, right? I'm thinking Fahrenheit, right? So sorry for all the folks outside of the US. And then we talk about, well, what's the current temperature? So the idea is that that PLC is bringing in probably on it like every second, if not more frequent, the temperature in the room. What's the air temperature? In this case, and you can see if you watch it, it'll fluctuate between 74 and 75, right? So it's kind of like right on the edge. Right. So the idea is there must be, we can assume logic, right, in the system that says, hey, if the temperature in the room is greater than what we want it to be, if it's greater than the set point, right, if the current temperature, in this case 74 or 75, is greater than the set point, the desired temperature at 72, turn the air conditioner on and leave it on, right, until the temperature in the room comes down. Right. And that's all we're talking about. And then we get a green box that says saying the air conditioner's on. And then you can also see that there's also a little dial. So that way, if I want to, change the set point, you can see, oh, if I did change it, right, to 77, like you would a thermostat, oh yeah, the air conditioner actually turns off. My air conditioner just literally turned off. That was freaky. So, but you get the idea, right? So we're going to go ahead and set this back to 72, right? We're saying we want it to be 72. It's 74, 75. The air conditioner comes back on, right? So hopefully that makes sense. So I'll look through and see if there's any questions real quick before we go on. Hey, Leo, welcome back. Um, I don't have these slots, but I can make them available. Yeah, for sure. Um, or then if you wanted to just ping me, and I have the links to the upcoming OT pen test course. There's a lot more slides there. So and it's pay what you can. So I'll mention that at the end. So thanks, Amit. Um, yeah, thanks, Mark. And yeah, that's always, there can be Python issue depending on how your system is set up for sure, because everybody's different. I do want to get those packaged as EXEs just to run. That'd be so much nicer. Um, I'm still working on that though. So I gotta to figure out. Let's see. Caleb's asking, I'm curious how teams are staying proactive in their OT environments when it comes to identifying and responding to potential threats. There's a lot there. I will just say Rob Lee highlighted this at B-Sides ICS last year, or no, earlier this year. Sorry, was that about he feels that, and if anybody knows, it's Rob, that there's only about 5% of OT ICS environments globally actually doing network security monitoring. I would even say that probably half of those are not doing a good job. So there's very few environments actually out there doing monitoring. So, but hopefully that answers the question. So, all right. So we have our HMI, right? Now we want to interact with, not, remember the HMI, right? We could potentially, it might have something like VNC on it, and then you could literally connect to it over the wire and start pushing buttons. A lot of these days are also, they're just web pages, so you can start clicking on things. That's where some of these like hacktivist attacks that we see happening in the news that happen, right? Because they just get an HMI and just start clicking on things, right? Just to see what happens. And sometimes you can make, yeah, something happen. Like there was a water facility in Texas that had like a couple gallons of water spill outside of a tank because somebody was clicking on the HMI, right? Not the end of the world, but still was a real world impact. It's just a matter of how bad is the impact. Thankfully, we haven't seen anything super bad yet. Doesn't mean that we're not though. So, which is why we're here, right? So we have a couple of tools. Again, these are ones that you're not going to pay $100 for. There are a few other ones that come, like if you're running Kali Linux, which we do in the OT pen test class. But I try not to always go directly to Kali Linux because if you think about it, how many people are going to be able to bring a laptop in running Kali Linux into like a power plant or a manufacturing facility? You're not, right? But we have Windows machines everywhere. So why not install some tools on those if we're talking about doing testing ourselves, right? So that's why I focus a lot on just using my desktop because yeah, A, it's easy, and B, yeah, it actually reflects the real world. We've actually had employees fired for bringing in things like Kali Linux into sites. We also have one guy bringing a Flipper Zero one time into a rail environment. Yeah, it's just when their safety is an issue, right? It's our number one priority. We just don't, you know, we don't take chances like that. So, anyways, so remember, there's a couple of tools in that folder, right? So there's the Modbus client, and then there's a Modbus polling tool, and this is one that I have in the class that it evolves over time. So you also see how the tools change because if we run the Modbus polling tool, what it does, you see it kind of ugly, right? But it does the job, right? So I can give it the IP address of the PLC. So in this case, right, it's just simulated on the local host. You can see it's going to reach out and it's going to pull the PLC values every second. Now, the PLC stores information like the current temperature, the desired temperature, whether the air conditioner is even on or not, right? It stores those in what it calls coils and registers. Coils, and what you'll see if I start pulling, coils are binary data. It's 0 or 1, right? That's it. So here you can see we have 10 coils. It's actually 0 based, which I always hate. So it's like the first one is number 0, and then the second one is number 1, regardless for now, right? The idea is if I'm just looking at the coils, there is something that pops up, right? I see 0, 0, 0, oh, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, blah, 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 right? So I see all zeros and then a number 1. Yeah. Like, okay, interesting. So that 1 might be something of note, right? And a lot of common systems, right? 0 means off, 1 means on. So could that indicate whether the air conditioner unit is on or not? yeah, there's a very real, good chance that that's the case. And like in this example, yeah, it actually is, right? Um, we can also look at the registers. Now remember, coils only store zeros and ones. That's it. If you want to store a higher value, then you have to use a register. So then you can see, well, oh, okay, if I'm storing temperatures, right, then I can use register. So in this case, right, I see a bunch of zeros. And then all of a sudden I say, oh, 72, and I see 75, right? So it's and 74, right? Because remember, it's changing I think I've said to set change every 5 seconds. So we can see, okay, we have the HMI, we see the values, right, reflected. So we have a good understanding of, oh, okay, that one indicates the air conditioner is on. And that in these registers, I see the set point, the desired temperature, 72, and then the current temperature in the room that we're pulling in from a temperature sensor is fluctuating between 74 and 75. Very cool. Now, just think for a minute though, because like, what if you just saw this and you didn't have that HMI? Then you might not as easily guess what those coils and those registers mean. Or, like in this case, I could probably still think, ooh, 72, right? Desired room temperature in the United States. 75, 74. That looks like, ooh, it's maybe that's the current temperature, right? A one means something's on, right? But there are a lot of real world examples that you can look at where you'll first connect to that control. You'll have no idea what any of that means. So this is where we start when we talk about where do we start in OT or ICS pen testing. This is one of the ways, right? We start when we can connect to that controller and start to pull data off of it. But what are we doing with it? And that's really the key because we have to reverse engineer the entire process to understand what can I change to make a real world impact. And that's what we're going to do in this case, right? So again, we have the HMI in this case, so we're very lucky, right? And that, all right, we have this pulling tool and it just keeps sitting there every second to pull the data in that little GUI. Okay, that makes it nice. Again, there's other ones out there. Some are free. Some of them, again, they want to charge you like $100, which just again blows my mind. But hey, if you can get $100 for a 20-year-old tool, more power to you, right? Let me go ahead and open up another prompt. Look over questions while we're waiting for that. Uh, so yeah, thanks for Pedro. Thanks for the support. Yeah, I'll tell you. Yeah, you can. My YouTube channel has um, all of the it's like 25 plus hours, and then the new version is going to start coming out in probably mid October. Mid by Halloween. How about that? So doesn't mean I don't mean hold off on it. So but yeah, and yeah, I'll mention the pen test course. Again, it's pay what you can. Feel free to come for free. That's not a problem at all. We'll mention all of that. Um, Hopefully the stream quality is not low. It looks good on my end, but hopefully that's not the case for everybody. So, if anything, the recording will be available after, including on YouTube. So, if it looks blurry from your stream, it should look good on the YouTube recording. I would hope. So, all right. So let's go back and oops, of course I. All right. So remember, we have our HMI. We have our little polling tool that we created in 30 seconds or less with ChatGPT. And then now I'm going to run this tool you can see it's called Modbus client. So this is one I was using in the DEF CON ICS village and a couple other talks last year. Uh, so it's not the prettiest oh yeah, tool, as you'll see. So we're going to give it the IP address of the system we're going to connect to over Modbus. Now remember, Modbus is unauthenticated. And sure, it's unencrypted as well. Again, most OT environments don't worry about encryption. I know if you're coming from IT cybersecurity, that's a really weird statement to hear. It's still really weird for me to say it after, you know, all this time, getting to work in OT. But so you can see, I connect right again. It doesn't ask me for a username and password, right? Ever. Again, it's unauthenticated. So what we can do is we can say, okay, remember we have those coils and registers. Now just think of it as like a little table where it stores data. Now they're also like behind the scenes, the programmer probably has like field names, like maybe current temperature, right? Set point temperature. We just can't see those, right? So we're just kind of having to, again, guess what these values mean and the logic that's sitting in the control system. So I can say, if I'm just doing this from a command line, I can say, hey, show me the coils. It says, okay, well, if you want to read coils, where do you want to start? So I'm going to say start at the very first coil. Remember, it's zero based. So we're going to start at number zero, which is the first coil. Yeah, I hate it, but that's how it is. I'm going to say, give me the first 10 coils. Again, this is what we're seeing in our little GUI, right? So nothing new, right? If we want to do the registers, right? Again, we can say, give me the 10 registers. Great. So now you can also see though, there's also those options for writing. So in this case, our goal is to manipulate the process so that we can turn off the air conditioner, right? Again, and since there's the delay, I won't ask for ideas on that. So, but like idea, my first idea would be, oh, well, can I just turn off the coil that says the air conditioner is on? So let's go ahead and try that. So I'm going to say, I'm going to write a coil. And remember, we're going to change the fourth coil, which is technically number 3. So I'm going to say change the fourth coil, which is in the third position. I'm going to hit it. And then what do you want it to change? So I'm going to change that one from from a 1 to a 0. And so if I hit it, right? And if I was watching with this in Wireshark, and we spent some time in Wireshark in the class, what you'll see is, yeah, the command was sent, and that the PLC, right, it changed the 1 from the 0. But you have to remember the logic in that simulated controller. It's continually running in what they call a control loop. And it's just going over and over and over and over and over and over again. And so in this case, it's just saying, hey, if the current temperature is higher than the set point, the air conditioner needs to be on. So even if we say, oh, turn off the air conditioner that way, it's not going to work because it still sees the current temperature is higher than the set point. So the air conditioner will always be on while that is true, right? So then I would be like, okay, well then what if I change the current temperature so that it's lower than the set point? So let's go ahead and change the register, right, for the set point or for the current temperature. So this is the one I have to count, right? Because it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's the sixth register, seventh in line, right? But sixth register, and that we're going to go ahead, in this case, to turn off the air conditioner, right? We would go ahead and have to, let's say, we'll set it to 60 degrees, right? 60 degrees is definitely under 72. It should go ahead and turn off the air conditioner, right? So we're going to go ahead and hit it. And you can see that the air conditioner actually went off for a second. Sometimes you don't even see it go off. But then it came back on, right? Because what's going on behind the scenes is that, remember, that controller it's connected to that temperature sensor. And that temperature sensor on that input is continually bringing in the temperature, maybe like every 1 second, right? And that's where, like in control systems, then we talk about, very finite, small amounts of time, right? Where we're talking milliseconds or even quicker. In that case, yeah, we're like in a second or so. So, like, yeah, we could actually see the air conditioner turn off. You would not want that type of condition to happen in like an industrial setting, like a power plant, right? But you could see it, right? It did turn off for a second, but then, oh, yeah, that sensor is continually bringing in the temperature and it's continually writing it to that register. So even though we and said, hey, 60, the idea is, oh, the temperature sensor, right? It just came back and updated the temperature. Could we create a script to sit there and just override it continually? You could, and it would just sit there and go kind of back and forth. And then kind of ugly, but it would kind of work. But there is the one way that we can do it, right? Is, well, what if we just remotely change the set point? Because if you think about it, that's something that's always meant for a human to set anyways. So it's not out of the ordinary for somebody to change a set point. Maybe, you know, I like it warmer anyways. So I'm going to turn 72 to 76. Like, well, why don't we do that? Right? So let's go ahead and write to the register where now we're storing the set point. And then, okay, let's go ahead and change it. We'll just say, just so it stands out, I'm going to change it to, oh, well, that was a bust, wasn't it? I'm going to write to the register. I'm going to say, well, which register are we going to write to? Right. So this should be number 4. And then what's the value going to be? So I want to set it to 80. And you can see now the set point is 80. And then the air conditioner clicked off, right? Because the air conditioner just went off again. That's really bizarre. The air conditioner, right? The set point, what we want it to be is 80 degrees now, which is a lot hotter than the current temperature of 74 or 75. So we actually were successful in turning off the air conditioner, like permanent. So in this case, right, maybe this is for an office and somebody comes in and it's really warm in the morning, right? Until somebody goes over to the HMI, right, or the thermostat on the wall and looks at the screen and says, oh, somebody set this to 80 degrees. Who the heck would have done that? Right. And then they go back and they set it to 72 and click, right, click the button. And then the air conditioner comes back on. That's really what we're talking about. In its most simplest form, when we talk about hacking, right, or doing pen testing in OT environments, it's very different than IT because we're talking about controlling, having an impact to a physical process in the real world. In this case, yeah, it's a really hopefully straightforward example of, yeah, it's an air conditioner. Right. Now that air conditioner, we don't know. Also, one of the things from this aspect is, well, how big is that air conditioner? Right? Because maybe it's the air conditioner for my house. Maybe it's an air conditioner for a section within a manufacturing facility. I have one client in particular that they have a large manufacturing facility here in South Carolina. If they have their AC, their air conditioner units are bigger than my house. It's crazy. And if they were to lose even one of those air conditioning units for more than 4 hours, the entire batch that they produce is lost. And to redo that, it takes up to 6 weeks. So imagine if you lost 6 weeks of work, right? How many, for them, millions of dollars would be lost because their air conditioner went out for 4 hours. Well, what if you were a competitor, or what if you were a hacktivist? Right? What if you were a state adversary? And you would be able to come in, turn off the temperature in the middle of the night. What if you air conditioner turned back on? But what if you, right, came in, turned that air conditioner off in the middle of the night, and there weren't any alarms, right? Because we should have alarms programmed into this as well to let human operators know when the air conditioner is turned off in that type of environment. Again, they lose their air conditioner, then they lose millions of dollars. That's where you have to start laying people off, right? That's one of my main goals is trying to prevent, right? I like helping people get jobs, not lose jobs. But again, hopefully that makes sense though. And if you have any questions, just throw them in the chat. But I'll kind of bring up that summary slide again, so you can kind of set it again. Again, this example is not the thermostat in the AC, but it doesn't matter at a high level. And I get it. Some engineers also hate when I say that, but it doesn't matter if you're doing this in, like, with that, maybe an HVAC unit in a manufacturing facility, in a power plant, in a water treatment facility. It could be a nuclear power plant. The basics, the fundamentals all work the same. And a lot of these different protocols and these different vendor systems that you have out there kind of all work the same, right? There's definitely some little differences for sure, but the basics, it all kind of works the same, believe it or not. Again, it's not rocket science. That's why I think a lot of people, when they heard of Frosty Goop, and Dragos released information about it, and they were kind of was like, well, that's nothing. That's super simple. Yeah, but we turn the heating off. They turn the heating off for 600 apartment buildings for 2 days in sub-zero temperatures in the middle of winter. Right? There was a real world impact. So remember, you have these physical system, the air conditioner, your where you're bringing in your natural gas supply, right? Your combustion chamber. The whole job of control systems is to monitor what's going on in the environment, and then allow us, if we need to, as operators, to make changes. And yes, there are conversations, right? How is AI going to start running those operations? Are you going to allow it? That's a whole that's a whole other thing. But what if I can connect to that controller, right? And I can look at those values just like we did, right? We connected to that controller and we made changes behind the scenes. We didn't even use the HMI, right? That was just there for reference. But how can I connect to that controller and make changes to where there's a real world impact? Like in that case, right? Eventually we got to the point where we could turn the air conditioner off completely. Boom. Again, it might not sound like the end of the world. And to some, in some environments, you turn off the air conditioner, it's not a big deal. In that one manufacturing client, yeah, it's a huge deal. There's a great example of the Cyber Avengers, which is a hacktivist group out of Iran, essentially. And like many hacktivists, they make really big claims. And they had made a claim one time about they had hacked into a water treatment facility in Israel. And what was kind of funny was, well, they had hacked into a water treatment facility, right? Hacked into using mostly, and it wasn't like, this huge water plant that served, 10,000 plus customers. It was the essentially the pump that cleaned the water in a hotel pool. And that's kind of to me, that really is like this example of how OT pen testing and attacks really work. Because again, most of the times, right, you're not going to have that HMI, right? All you're going to have, right, are these numbers. And I use these because I think, again, these are pretty easy to recognize. I know Fahrenheit's weird for if you're outside of the United States, sorry. But other than that, right, I think, it's really probably easy to guess what this could be. So the next lab in this series is, well, what if you don't have the HMI? Then what do you do? But then also think of like an attacker. I don't want to necessarily crash the plant today because I want to put myself in a position or what they talk about pre-position to be able to have an impact down the road in the future. So hopefully that was a little overview. I have a lot of fun with that. So I hopefully everybody else does as well. I appreciate everybody for joining. If you have a couple of quick sections, I just had the information about. Oop, there you go. Again, if you do me a favor, if you can, like the session. Of course, if you haven't checked out my YouTube channel, you can subscribe there because I have we're probably closing in on like 50 hours of free course content for OT ICS cybersecurity. If you could like my LinkedIn post from today, I'll put that in the chat as well. That was special thanks to my friends at Assembly because they're helping now, make it so I can make more content, which is really awesome because that's just not something that I've always had the pleasure to do. And then if you're interested in the OT pen test course, again, I feel like a sales guy, but you can come for free. So the first class actually sold out. I had over 600 people sign up, which is awesome. That's next Friday. So I scheduled a second session the following Friday. And then that you'll have access to not only the recordings and the chat from the first, so you're not going to miss out anything. I think we already have like 150 people signed up for this one. I guess pay what you can. If you go to the interface, the minute it has a minimum of $10 US, but if you can't do that, again, for whatever reason, just send me an email at mike@mikeholcomb.com. You can ping me on LinkedIn and you're in for free. So it's not a big deal, and you don't have to give me a reason for anything. I understand. Um, there's been a lot of times in my life that I had absolutely nothing. So uh, not again nothing to worry about there. Um, I was just going to drop these in the chat. So yeah, so there's a link to the class. I think the second session, again, the one that's not sold out, and then to the post today. So again, special thanks for Assembly for making that happen. Um, and with that, again, I appreciate everybody for coming, taking the time. I'll hang around. I got a few minutes. I don't have a call like right away, so if there's any questions, I don't mind hanging around for a little while. And then, but again, thanks to everybody for coming. And then hopefully we'll be doing more. Again, next Thursday, I'm going to do same time and talk about the key insights. Like again, for me, out of the Dragos year-end report, because I think there was a lot of really interesting things that didn't get a lot of attention. It was like really quiet this year, which I was really kind of shocked about because there were like a lot of like, what are you talking about moments in that report. So we'll talk about those next Thursday. So, but yeah, thanks for coming. Mahalo, Jasper. So I appreciate that. So um, yeah, thanks for coming, Mark. Yeah. Susheta? I probably butchered that. I'm sorry. It's the US, I'm really sorry. So thanks for coming. Hey, Ricardo, thanks for coming. I appreciate it. Yeah. Hola. So Clayton, thanks for coming. Sondale, thanks for coming. I appreciate everybody for coming. So, all right. probably aren't any questions, I guess. But so again, thanks for everybody for coming. Hopefully, I'll see you in the class. I know we already have a lot of people signed up for next Friday. Again, I'm super excited. And then the second session again on October for or August 1st. Uh, I think it's about 150 so far. So I think we'll have a couple hundred for that one as well. So again, I appreciate it, everybody. And thanks. Yeah, I'm glad everybody enjoyed it. So, and yeah, enjoy the labs. So I'll see everybody on LinkedIn or YouTube.